Good evening. Welcome to tonight's ASES Virtual Fellows Core Curriculum Series on practice management and other issues facing young members of the ASES. Tonight's session is starting an independent research program. It will be moderated by Dr. Lisa Gallitz. Our panelists include Dr. Ted Blaine, Brandon Erickson, and Ron Navarro. I'd like to give a special thanks to Dr. Bill Levine, Media Past President of ASES, whose idea about the practice management series this is, and Dr. Dr. Samar Hassan and myself will be monitoring the chat room. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you like. With that, Dr. Gallitz.
Hi, thanks everybody, and welcome to our session on starting an independent research program. I'm fortunate to have a great panel with me. Again, I'm Lisa Gallitz. I'm from Mount Sinai Health System in New York. I'm joined by Ted Blaine, who's a professor at Weill Cornell and Hospital for Special Surgery. Ron Navarro joins us from Southern California, where he serves as Regional Coordinating Chief of Orthopedic Surgery at Kaiser Permanente. And then Brandon Erickson from the Rothman Institute. He's an assistant professor at both Hofstra and Jefferson University. I would like to thank DePuy Synthes for sponsoring our event tonight, and I have a brief message from them.
Developing the future leaders of tomorrow is our priority today. DePuy Synthes Future Leaders is a comprehensive educational program developed for today's orthopedic residents and fellows. Online, anytime, anywhere education modules when you need to prepare. From wound closure to complex revision surgeries, we have you covered. Content and curricula align with current ABOS and ACGME milestones. Our in-person and virtual clinical skills building programs allow learners to apply their knowledge, enhance their skills, engage with key faculty facilitators, and connect with peers. Not able to get away? Well, learners can build skills prior to entering the OR through our virtual reality systems. With 14 cross-specialty modules currently available, learners can gain an understanding of the instruments and procedures simulating a real-world experience. The new Future Leaders app is where you can find the latest calendar of educational events, access our Dubs and Scrubs podcast series focused on women in orthopedics, and find quick-hitting snippets of clinical information. We know time is limited. The app is your quick access to information when you need it most. At DePuy Synthes, we are transforming the future of surgery, committed to advancing patient care, and focused on developing the future leaders in orthopedics.
So thanks to DePuy Synthes again for their sponsorship. Tonight's agenda, we're going to start off by I'm going to ask the panelists how they got started. I'd like to hear their stories and their good advice. Secondly, how to keep it going through grants and philanthropy. Thirdly, building and supporting your team. This is really important. Collaboration with multi-center studies and industry collaboration. And then finally, the final mile in the marathon, getting it to publication. And then if we have time, we'll have some final pearls. There will be question and answer, so please submit your questions onto the chat. And Drs. Hassan and Gupta are going to be keeping an eye on that for us. So why don't we get it going? Dr. Blaine, why don't you kind of talk about how you got started when you started practice, what your area of research is, and how you kind of fueled the fire in those first couple of years.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I'm looking forward to discussion. I mean, for me, it's all been about mentorship. I mean, I've been really lucky throughout my career to have great mentors. So, like many of us, I had some interest in research even as an undergraduate, worked at NIH for a while. But it really was when I was at Rochester and did a year of a research fellowship and worked together with some really big name mentors. Ed Pouzis, as a former ORS president, Randy Rozier, Regis O'Keefe, both former chairs there and MD PhDs, and Eddie Schwartz. So in that year, we worked on periprosthetic osteolysis, which has been an interest area for me. Lucky enough after that year to get a couple of publications in JBJS out of that year. So, really had some early success, and I've been interested since. And then the rest of the mentors throughout my career, I went on to Columbia to do my fellowship. The chairs there have been, incredibly supportive. Lou Bigliani was really helpful in getting research started. Bill Levine, as you know, is chair now and continues to support research in a major way. So, it's really been about the mentorship throughout the career. I had some time, at a couple of other places working on faculty. So when I was at Brown, Mike Ehrlich actually, gave me a lab. So he gave me a bench, gave me a senior research scientist, and those kind of things with support and mentorship led to an NIH grant and to some really great projects. And then at Yale, great support from Gary Friedlander, working together with Francis Lee on some projects. My area of interest has been in molecular research, really, which we can talk about. I mean, it's an interesting area. It's a little bit hard to do because you really have to have a lot of support behind you to do it. You have to have a lab, you have to have facilities, you have to have money. But I've been fortunate throughout my career really to have that. So, we can talk in more detail about what's really important to research. But for me, it's all about mentorship.
Great. Ron, how about you? How did you get yourself started?
Thanks, Lisa, for including me tonight in the ASES and Doctors Gupta and Hassan, and really honored to be with this panel. I started very early on during my initial years in orthopedics. I took time to do some research, and interestingly, it was in total joint arthroplasty research with Harlan Amstutz at UCLA and others along that line. And so it was a lot of it was implant retrieval, more clinical than Ted just described. And then I went through my years of training and really gotten away from research. And then when I joined Kaiser Permanente, right around the time I became a partner, we really became interested in what we could consider our wheelhouse of research. And so we really thought long and hard and started to develop the ideas for having registries in our system. The registries themselves were organized by a fair number of people, but I have to give a lot of credit. There's a lot of New York people on this call tonight, to Don Fithian, who trained for a long time in New York and did a lot of amazing work to learn about registries in other countries, because as you know, our Academy's registry is the first national one in the States. And so he went to Sweden and learned from the great registry starters there and brought it back. And so the first registry was registries with total hip and total knee, but I had a deep interest in trying to start a shoulder arthroplasty one. So a number of years later began that work. But I have to really credit Don, who is always so humble, anybody who knows him, and always pushed for just the truth and what we're trying to do rather than a personal acclaim and that sort of thing. So as much as learning the nuts and bolts of putting registries together also taught me a humbleness that really I really am appreciative of.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Kind of a theme here about mentors. Brandon, how about you? Tell us about your first few years in practice and the research, how you got started.
Yeah, mine started not until residency. I honestly did very little when I was a med student in undergrad. So really, I got involved when I became a resident, and it really got triggered by a few of the fellows at Rush asking me to help them with some projects. And basically, I just pretty much said yes. Anytime anybody ever asked me to help them with a book chapter, help them with a project, whether it was basic science, clinical research, biomechanics. And then over time started to hone my research focus a little bit more to clinical outcome studies. And I, like Ron and Ted, have very good, outstanding mentors at Rush in Dr. Anthony Romeo and Bernie Bach, were really great mentors for me in research. And I would say what they taught me, and actually Shane No taught me this as well, when you're starting out in research and as you start to learn more, it becomes a little bit easier if you pick a specific topic to try to research or try to figure out what's going on in the literature with. So for me, it was ulnar collateral ligament tears in the elbow. There wasn't a lot written on this when I was a resident, and it started to come about in kind of 2012, 2013, when it started to become, the epidemic that we see now. And so I had a fellow that I worked with on this, and Shane No actually taught me, he said, listen, pick a topic, learn all about it, learn everything you can, read all the literature, and then you'll figure out some questions that you need to answer. And so that kind of triggered that for me. And so I started when I was an intern with some studies, and we kind of progressed along and then started to work with Major League Baseball a little bit more and doing some studies using their database, their HITS database, health injury tracking system that they have, as kind of all of the professional sports do. And I've looked at a lot of injuries, not just of the elbow, but also the shoulder in these throwing athletes. And so I think that for me, it was important to kind of hone in on that at the start. I certainly do things in other areas of shoulder and elbow in sports as well, but I've kind of honed into the throwing athlete a lot. It's helped me be a little more efficient in my research, I would say. I haven't done a lot of the animal studies, the biomechanical studies. I've had done a couple, but not as many as you guys have. Mine's mostly been the clinical outcomes things, and it's helped me really to become efficient at writing those papers and getting them to publication, understanding what the readers, I think, want, or at least the reviewers want, because I've now read most of the literature on that, and I picked a topic where there wasn't much literature, which was very beneficial to me. But I think that's helped me out a lot.
Good. And Ron, I want to kind of circle back to your registry work, because I think that's really important. And, we're really trying, and there have been some industry sponsored registry projects. So can you kind of speak to that? Like what you're doing at Kaiser, and how, if at all, you interface with industry, and what you think the role of industry is in this?
First I want to go back and redo my answer and tell you that during my fellowship with Freddie Food, JP Warner, and Chris Horner, they all had influence on me too. If they ever saw this and I didn't mention their names, I'd be crushed. Once a fellow, always a fellow, right? Our interface with industry has been really great. And, I'm going to go off a little bit from KP in a second, but we have long had a relationship with industry where they help to give us lists of components so that we can really understand what we're putting in, and really have a prosthesis library, if you will. And there's a lot of these kind of brewing now, so that when we put things in, we also have comparators. So from one company to the next, we know that we're still comparing parts right, because with so much modularity, if you are trying to say this failed because of this piece, the widget B, not the widget A, you could get into trouble if you're not across different companies comparing in a similar way. So we first got that started, and we have a great relationship with some of the international registries, like the Australian registry, and as well as the Swedish and others. And there's a group called the International Society of Arthroplasty Registries. Kind of sounds corny, right? The International Society of Arthroplasty Registries. And I'm on the national board, or the international board of that. And they've created an international prosthesis library for hip and knee components, and now for shoulder arthroplasty components. We're deeply invested in that, so that we can compare across for best in class, and also those that, a lot of registries are built for implant surveillance and to ensure that implants are doing well. And so you want to be able to compare correctly. And we actually have a industry partner on our major committees, so that they're deeply invested in it, and are right there at the table with us to have those conversations. I don't know if I answered it well enough for you.
Well, I kind of just want to get practical. So let's say for our audience, right, we've got 15 people listening here. They're all fellows. They're going to start practice. Like, what's accessible to them? Can they participate in registries, and how do they get involved?
Yeah, a lot of it depends upon what type of practice you join. In our practice, I think Brandon was saying something that really resonated with me. I think I'm so impressed with Ted's research, and we just can't do bench research in our system. We're a clinical system. And so Brandon really kind of excited me with the idea that he says, pick a joint, get good at it. And so in our system, we have a lot of data, and we can harness that data. So we thought registries were the way to go. So if a young fellow comes out and they're in a system that it currently doesn't have a registry, certainly they can join the nascent registries that are out there. The Academy's got a registry. There are implant registries through industry, like you were alluding to, Lisa. And I think that those are all fine as well too. You just want to be able to know that you can control the data, and you can control the results, and be able to say whatever you want. you know, at the end of the day, we're trying to do the best thing for patients. So if we can say this implant's doing great, or conversely, that implant we might be seeing with our statistical analysis, it's not doing as well. You want to be able to say that. So, but to answer your question, I think they have to see what kind of practice they're in. So if you go into solo practice, probably a lot harder to be involved in a big major registry unless you join the academies group of registries, because that's available to anybody, and they're making it as easy as possible to get that information out. And then the industry registries, if you you know, want to be invested in an industry registry and make sure you still have control over the results that you want to get out there and say about. If you're in a bigger practice, or HSS has registries, Mayo, a lot of great affiliated registries with big major institutions. Rothman's doing great work. So I think that those are all available if you join those big ones. The small, if you're a private practice, small practice, you're probably going to have to go with the industry or the academy in just my first blush at this.
Great, great. So Ted, let's kind of circle back to you. Talk to us about grant writing. So you were in a situation where you were able to do a lot of basic science research, but talk to us about how you learned to write grants and where you would recommend submitting for some early awards.
Yeah, you know, again, that goes back to mentors. So having, you know, somebody to help you write, you know, and to run it by is really, really important if you have access to that. You know, there are some institutions, some universities, and even hospitals that have grant writing professionals that you can reach out to, and they can help you. So, you know, even if you're not at a big academic university, the hospitals have them too in many places. So I think those are helpful. I think, you know, I've used various sources of funding throughout my career. I think early on, you know, it was relatively easy to get grants through Orthopedic Research Education Foundation, so OREF grants. So I've had some of those. There are smaller grants that you can get through the OREF if you're working together with a resident. So I think they're $5,000 resident grants. There's a variety of those available. ASES has grants, as you know, so there are different types of grants available. Maybe not as many, but they're certainly there. There's lots of different other sources of funding that are dependent upon your hospital and your department too. So, you know, just as an example, when I was at Yale, you know, one of the initiatives that I had, and you can probably speak to this too, when you're in a leadership position, you actually have the ability to control the purse strings a little bit, which is nice. So we, you know, at Yale, we offered $5,000 seed funding to each faculty member who had a good research project, which I think was a great way to incentivize research. So, you know, there may be those types of opportunities available. Hospitals have their own grants sometimes, you know, so you can reach out to the hospitals for that. You know, the other standard sources, NIH grants are hard to get. You know, you've gotten them, Lisa, so you can speak to that. But I mean, that's really an elite group with an NIH grant. DOD, Department of Defense grants, you know, that's something that you may have access to. NFL, you know, there are different sports organizations that have grants. U.S. Lacrosse, you know, we've used before. VA, so VA grants, you know, through the government. And then industry grants, you know. So one of the things I think is interesting that I know we had talked about previously is sometimes you think about industry grants as, you know, maybe not as prestigious as getting some of these other grants, but they can be really effective and very, very, very useful. So, you know, I've worked with industry on some various projects throughout the years, and that's been really, really a great source of funding and a great opportunity to do research that otherwise wouldn't be available. So I think I covered most of it, but I'm sure.
Yeah, I would just to build on that, agree with everything you say. Just, you know, when you're at the fellow level, I think, you know, an NIH grant is really something to aspire to, but you got to start small, right? So my first grants were from OREF, which I think is an amazing organization, and probably wouldn't be doing what I was doing if I didn't have them, because they were very, you know, they supported really my first three. They were my first three grants. So, you know, that early small funding is really important. So to those fellows out there, you know, I would just encourage you to look at, the American Hand Society has some, and they are interested in upper extremity because they're hand and upper extremity, and Shoulder and Elbow Society sports, so go for those little ones. And I have to say that I took a grant writing course, like my first or second year in practice, and that was life-changing, because nobody is born knowing how to write grants, but it is a skill, and you do get better at it the more you do. And so you need to learn it. And so
Who offered that, Lisa?
OREF, no, I'm sorry, ORS, Orthopedic Research Society had it, and AAMC, American Association of Medical Colleges, has them too. Since you're in orthopedics, I would gravitate toward ORS. If you're interested in it, the other thing that Orthopedic Research Society has is a really great mentorship program. So if you're out there and you have any desire to do research, even if it's clinical research, I would encourage you to join ORS and to get involved in their mentorship program, because they're really a very giving group of people and are very helpful in terms of giving advice. And they've really worked hard to develop their mentorship curriculum lately. So I would definitely check that out. Brandon, any how have you supported your research? Do you have philanthropy, grants, other sources?
Yeah, so it's been a combination of everything you guys have said. So there were a couple of projects when I was a resident. I had an OREF grant. I also had one from Mid-Atlantic Orthopedic Association, so the MAOA. So based on where certain fellows are located and where you go into practice, your kind of local or kind of regional orthopedic group will also have usually a $3,000 to $5,000, $6,000 grant. We used ours to look at fatigue in baseball pitchers, and so we paid our participants to come in and did some things. I've also been very fortunate that some of my mentors have also put up some money that they have received from industry or other sources. Specifically, Anthony Romeo is very generous, and we're trying to do some projects. He'll oftentimes, help fund the study a little bit, and then we'll look for grants on the back end. There's another couple of ways to look at funding things too. And when I was at Rush, they were very efficient at this, which was patients often will donate a good amount of money to a research fund if you have a research fund. It's something hard to start. But once you put the time in and have it started, it can be a really good source of funding for your specific department. So if you join a place that has that, Ted was saying that the faculty at Yale got $5,000 to start. This wasn't something as much as where everyone was given a set amount of money. It was based on merit of the projects you were trying to do and need for the money at the time. But there is some amount of philanthropy that can come from patients. And the other thing you can get is if you do get involved in some of the registry, the implant registries with industry, as Ron was talking about, some of them will pay you a certain amount of money if you make sure your patients stay in the registry and you collect the specific amount of data that has to be there. And so what you can do is build your research fund from that money that you get back, which is something that I've seen people do and we've done. And that can be pretty effective because it's a pretty good sum of money that if you're pretty diligent in getting those data points collected, that you can build a program off of. So I think those are kind of the more important things. And the registry stuff, to what just to bring it back to Ron was talking about the registry stuff. I think it's sometimes can be hard to get in the registry things. There's some other ones, Pearl Diver and NISQIP and things like that you can get involved in. Some of them cost a good amount of money to have access to the data, and the data isn't always as clean as you would want it to be. So some of those are good, but some of those can be a little bit difficult. And once you start working with it, you'll see some of the flaws in the data. And so it's just something to think about. But yeah, I agree with what one said about, trying to start up, depending on what kind of practice you join, doing a lot of clinical research. And you can also, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but you can kind of start your own database depending on what type of group you join and what your partners are doing. Rothman, when I came, did not have a database and any type of rotator cuff surgery. So, having done some stuff at Rush and then at HSS, we put together some of the data points that we wanted to collect. So we're in the midst of building that now. Now it's going to take, this is a long-term project. This is years that it's going to take to get any real data from this, but it's something that when you start out, it's worthwhile to do because you have some time. So you can think about the data points you want to collect and start to implement these things, implement the software that you're going to use to collect the data. And then you'll start to see some fruit from this, 5-10 years down the road.
Lisa?
Right. Ron, yeah, go ahead.
I really love what you're all saying about funding. I want to just kind of make a point about, and Brandon mentioned it a little bit too. You gotta be in for the long game on a lot of this stuff. If you're just starting out, and so when we started, we were one medical assistant and Dawn Fithian, literally. Now that medical assistant is a PhD and she runs the entire registry, like a whole floor in San Diego of like 50 people. So, but that was a 20-year evolution. So you got to play the long game in all this. Our funding initially was I shouldn't say it was in rebates from companies. So back to your point about industry, we just said, hey, if we do this much of this, can you give us a little bit of that? And we didn't take the money and put it in our pockets. We're a not-for-profit on the health plan side of my organization, so it couldn't be in our pockets, but we were able to kind of cubbyhole away money and then build this out. And over time, we couldn't do rebates anymore. It wasn't seen to be kosher with the contracting. But then now we're looking at for years having one portion of our entities pay for it, now a different portion. So there's a lot of give and take, and you just have to be in for the long game. And you also have to know that the funding sources change over time once you get really big, and you can freak out every couple of years when you think the funding's going to go away, and you were driving a little peanut car and now you're driving an aircraft carrier and you think I don't have any money to pay for the fuel anymore. It could be a problem. So it's an exciting ride.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Ted, talk to us about your team. Who's on your research team? How often do you meet? What time do you meet? Talk to us about that relationship.
Yeah, well, it changes. So I have, the benefit of having to, build and work with some different teams in my career. So I can comment really on what I think is the best thing if you can do it. I mean, you need to have regular meetings, so that's, important once you've assembled your team. Who do you need on the team? A lot of it depends upon what your resources are to be able to build your team and pay for them. I've always found that, especially with clinical research, if you can have a clinical research coordinator on your team, that's incredibly valuable. I don't know if any of you all have that, but they're specially trained in how to collect clinical research data, and they will come to the office and collect the data on the patients that you're studying. They'll make sure that they arrive, at the appropriate appointment. They'll arrange everything, and then really just do everything you need to collect the data. So, if you had to put your money into one thing as you build your program, I would say a clinical research coordinator is probably the most important. Who else on the team? It just depends on what you have access to. I mean, free labor is our students and residents and fellows, and it's certainly they get things out of it, so it's not really free, but if you don't have a lot of resources, that's a very reasonable group to have on your team.
Yeah.
So I mean, it really just depends on what your resources are, what you're trying to do. If you are trying to do lab research, having a dedicated research scientist, if you can have that. So let's say, you're trying to negotiate a new job or a new contract somewhere and you really want to do bench research. If you have one research scientist dedicated to you, you'll get a lot done. I mean, we can talk about all the other people you could put on the team, but those I think are the most important people to have if you can have them.
Yeah. And Brandon, how about you? Who's on your team?
Yeah, we have, it's interesting. So when I joined Rothman, so I joined them in New York, and Rothman's obviously based out of Philadelphia. So I didn't have quite the access to the fellows and residents that I was part of that team when I was a resident and a fellow. One of the things I think you can do, because I think a lot of people are taking jobs in satellite offices or places where they're not necessarily in the main hub, but they're kind of in offshoots of different practices, either in the suburbs or a little ways away from the mothership. And so for me, one of the things that I tried to do early on was make sure I went down to Philadelphia pretty regularly, did all the journal clubs down there, went to teach the fellows and residents in some cadaver labs so I could at least get involved with them. So even though I wasn't seeing them on a day-to-day basis, at least they knew who I was. And if I had an idea for something, I could bounce it off of them and they could help, because I do think, to Ted's point, I think residents and fellows are the best people to help with research outside of a dedicated, research person or a scientist. So from my perspective, those are the most important people. For us, we have kind of research coordinators, similar to what Ted was talking about, and they're usually somebody who's thinking about going to medical school or is taking a year off of medical school and kind of runs the, research program, let's say. So for example, for the sports department and the shoulder and elbow department at Rothman, there's a research coordinator for each of those departments. And once a month, we have a research meeting where we go over all of the projects that are in various stages of completion. And so we run through a different Excel sheet with everybody on the call. We say what's been done over the last month, what the kind of action items are going forward, who's on the project, et cetera. And it helps keep people engaged and involved. The problem is when it gets a little bit too big, it becomes a little hard to keep everybody involved. So when I was at Rush, Dr. Bach would have a meeting once a week with the fellows and have them go over all the projects each week with them. I think that was probably very good for them. It's why they were very academically productive, but that's a lot of work to do that, in practice, to put that into practice. But I think it really depends on what you have access to, because everybody's going to be in a different position when they're coming out. Not everybody's going to have access to a lot of help. And so I would say get involved with the residents and fellows as you can, get involved with your senior faculty at wherever you're going to, see if they need help with things. If you have some ideas, definitely spitball your ideas at them and see if it's something that you can work together on. But I think getting involved early on is important.
Yeah.
Can I just make one comment on that, just to piggyback on the thoughts? Like if whoever it is, whether it's a clinical research coordinator or it's a research assistant or whatever it is, if you're trying to do clinical research, trying to collect the data yourself in the office is nearly impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So you really have to have that person dedicated to come to the office and to collect the data from them. So just one point that I found is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be tough. We also, and I'm sure you guys do too, I know you do, have intake questionnaires. And so to all the fellows, I would recommend that you make copies of your mentors' intake questionnaires, because that's a great source of baseline data too. And really kind of, have it understood that when your patients come, they have to fill that out, and it would have like a SF12 or, simple shoulder test or whatever you want to use on their ASES score. The other thing that I just want to mention is, from a practical standpoint, one of the plastic surgeons when I was at WashU was a very prolific researcher, and she gave me some advice. She said, when you're in the lab and you're working with PhD students, remember they're at a completely different phase of life than you are, and they do not function well early in the morning. So as surgeons, of course, we want to get up at 6 a.m. because we got to go to the OR at 7:30. If you're working with a PhD candidate, clinical or basic science, like they're in their 20s, they are not wanting to get up for a meeting at 6 o'clock. And when they do, they're not in a good mood and they're not their smartest. So she said, it's inconvenient for you, but you need to meet with them in the middle of the day or in the afternoon. And so she was right. Those guys, they will do it in an emergency, but they don't love it. So you have to remember who you're working with. And then also I did want to comment too about if you're working with a research scientist. It's really important that you have a symbiotic relationship with them. And remember, if you're working with a PhD, they can't just be attached to you. So in order to be respected within their field by their peers in Orthopedic Research Society and biomechanical engineering and blah, 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 they have to have research that is their independent idea and have to be, to some extent, independently funded in order to rise in their basic science field. And so I always really tried to be really cognizant of that and encourage the scientists, when they're young, that it's great to do clinical collaboration. That's why you come work in a clinical department, but you also need to have independent work that is your own. And I help them, like I'll be a significant contributor on a grant where they're PI without me, because that's just really important. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're working with a research scientist, you should, keep that in mind too. So,
Lisa,
Ron,
can I
go ahead.
comment on that too? I think, for our the fellows who are on, they're coming out of the greatest shoulder programs in the country, and they are so filled with knowledge. And when you start interacting with statisticians and research folks, they have been doing their part for a long time, and you may find as a young, really intelligent shoulder surgeon from the best programs in the country that you have to check your ego at the door too, because they're going to probably still teach you things that you didn't know about the conduct of research, the order of people's names on papers. It seems mundane, but boy, you can lose sleep over that. And if you're probably best, as you say, Lisa, to be symbiotic and kind of just not feel like, I'm going to come in and tell these people what to do. You have to teach them many times about the clinical relationships to the questions, because not all of them always understand the clinical piece, but there's other parts they can teach you. And so I think I guess the theme of what I'm saying is always be in a mode of always trying to learn and not be the person who's telling others how to do stuff.
Yeah.
To your point, Ron, of the statistician thing, that is, I think, is such a good point. I have been very lucky to work with a guy who was a couple years ahead of me in residency. His name's Peter Chalmers. He's out in Utah now. He's fantastic. He's a shoulder and elbow surgeon. He's wonderful, but he's also a genius, and he is very well attuned to statistics. And so anytime that I have a paper that I usually ask Peter to help me with the statistics, because he's very good at it, and he has a clinical understanding of what we're trying to get out of the paper. So sometimes you're going to see when you work with statisticians, they have absolutely no idea what you are going after or what you're trying to find in the paper. And so they'll throw a bunch of different tests at you and it won't make sense to you. And it's very hard to write a paper and make it translate to the readership for JSES and other journals. So if you can find a statistician, and I'm saying this is a hard thing to do, don't get me wrong, but if you can find a statistician that has also some area of clinical knowledge about what you're doing, it makes your life 1,000 times better and will generate so much better results for your papers. I think it's really important.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Very good advice. And so, Ron, because you're in a very clinical environment, what if someone wants to do a study, but they're not affiliated with a university? How do you handle the IRB situation?
So we have an internal IRB within Kaiser Permanente. We just opened a medical school like in July too. So now we're becoming a little bit more like, Mayo and Geisinger. Obviously Mayo is the biggest, but Geisinger, these institutions that then lop on a medical school. But we have an internal IRB. We have a means by which to apply for monies or just time. If you put forth an IRB with a study that's not part of one of the known registries where the data is being pre-collected by the group in San Diego, there's another group in Pasadena for Southern California and a group in Oakland, Northern California for our Kaiser Permanente researchers up there. And you can put forth and say it's less than 100 hours of statistical time. Half the time, young researchers say, I don't know how much time you take to do your thing. That's like you asking me how long it would take for you to do an operation. You don't do it. I don't do the stats, but you kind of say, I think it's less than 100 hours, and they'll do that quote unquote for free if you get the IRB accepted. But yet there's other ones where if you think you need more time, you have to apply for funding, harder to get that money. And so I think I'm getting to the answer. But if I didn't answer the question well enough, let me know.
Yeah.
A comment. I think it's a good point. I think sometimes you think, because you go through all your training and you're at a big university somewhere, that it's only the universities that have IRB boards. The large hospitals and large hospital systems all have their own internal IRB review boards. So you usually are going to have access to that, if you're in a system. If you can't use that, there's the Western IRB that you can use, which is an outside contractor review board, but usually you don't have to go to that level.
Yeah.
The
Oh,
IRB can be very different from place to place too, as people may have experienced. So, when I was at Rush, the IRB was very fast and got things done very quickly, and it took a few weeks and things got approved as long as it wasn't anything out of left field. When I was at HSS as a fellow, it took months to get things approved through the HSS IRB sometimes. Even it was just registry stuff. So if you're thinking of a project and you have an idea, start the IRB process early because you don't know how long it's going to take to get through your specific IRB.
Yeah, that is great advice. Brandon, let's just kind of stay with you for a minute. Talk to us about publication. Like how did you take a scientific writing course? Tell us about your bumps and starts when you were writing your first papers.
So Dr. Bach and Dr. Romeo tell you that every paper can have a home. So if you're going to start doing a paper, push it through to publication. I have a couple papers in the Polish Journal of Orthopedics. It doesn't matter, just get it through to publication. Okay. So I have kind of a hierarchy of things that that I'll send my papers to, and if it gets rejected from one, it'll go to the next one. No, to your point of having how to write papers, it really comes with experience and having some good mentors above you, whether it's attendings or fellows, or even residents that are ahead of you, or even your peers that have written papers, having them give you feedback on your writing. So I can tell you that when I was an intern and wrote papers, it was an absolute nightmare for people to correct them. And I had a few people that really took some time and taught me how to do it the right way. And that helped me to be able to write better. The other thing that helped me to write better was becoming a reviewer for a lot of different journals. So reviewing for JSES and AJSM, and seeing what my other reviewers on the same papers that I had, what their comments were and what I was picking up, and to see how or what the other reviewer was looking for to help me to better write papers when I was doing it. So I had an idea in the back of my head of what people wanted to hear, not to be too verbose, get to the point pretty quickly. When you're young and you're writing, people tend to add in a lot of fluff, and things are pages longer than they need to be. What I've learned as I've gone through it is make things short, sweet, to the point, get your point across, and then be done. And so I think that as you write more, you'll get better practice at that. But to your point of getting, once you get to that final stage of getting ready to submit for publication, as Ron and Ted and you said before, figure out your author order, right? So don't make anybody mad. And you probably should have figured that out before you started writing the paper, because things can become a problem down the road. You don't want to have too many people on the paper. You want to make sure everybody actually contributed to the paper before you start to submit it, or the journals will balk at you if you have too many people on the paper. Understand what the publication fees for some journals are. So there are a lot of journals that are coming out now, JSES International, OJSM for AOSSM. They're kind of open access journal, and there's a lot of journals that are moving towards the open access platform, which is great, but it comes to the publication fee. And so if you haven't worked that into your funding or have somebody to pay for that, you're going to need to figure out how to pay for that, because those costs can be pretty high. You're talking $600, $750 for OJSM, and JSES International almost $750 to $1,000 sometimes. So there can be a big monetary hit with that. And so what I'll usually do is start, as long as it's a pretty reasonable paper, start with the highest impact factor journal that I think it could get into. So for me, that's usually JSES or AJSM. Most of usually the papers that I'm writing on clinical outcome studies are not going to JBJS or one of the medical journals. So I'm usually in the JSES, AJSM realm. If it gets rejected from there, then I'll start to come down towards arthroscopy, potentially OJSM if somebody can fund it, JSES International, and then kind of continue on down from there. One of the things that can be difficult from a shoulder arthroplasty research perspective is there's not a lot of journals that publish shoulder arthroplasty research. JSES is one, of course, JSES International, Journal of Shoulder Arthroplasty, but it's much harder to find a home for a shoulder arthroplasty study than it is for a shoulder labrum study or a Latarjet study, because the sports medicine journals will take those. So just have an idea of where you're going to submit things before you start, because if you start the process and then you come to the end of it and you have a hard time figuring out where to go, it can sometimes be a little bit of a pain.
I also want to make a shout out to JSES Seminars in Arthroplasty, not because there's any one person on this.
Oh, sorry, not international seminars. Yeah, that was the one I was saying. Sorry.
I did want to say something about the ideas for these young people on the call, this idea of an egalitarian way to get involved, because once again, a lot of the young fellows will come out and think that they have all the ideas for the next great paper. And they don't know, Lisa, that you have a list of ideas that you've put forth, but your data wasn't quite ready. It wasn't quite ready for prime time. And they become a little bit bummed out when they say, I know we have a paper for this. And you say, 17 other people had that idea 3 years ago. So you got to talk to them about when that data gets ready for prime time, you're going to have to fight through that. So what we've done in KP with the registries, we've developed this methodology where young people come in and they say, I want to be involved in research. We say, we're going to match you with one of the more veteran researchers so that they get on papers early on and they learn some of this cadence, as Brandon was saying, about how to go through the publication process, because many of them think they know it, but until they have to live it through a lot of papers, and especially a lot of denials. That's what really makes a person a researcher or not, to have a paper be denied 3 times and find a place for it. That's that it can be really discouraging. It's like an actor who can't take being told they're not going to be part of the movie. It's like hard to take, and that's what really separates researchers. So we pair them together so that they can get their feet wet, and if they keep showing interest, they get more reps. It's like a football team, like, hey, you're making plays, you get more time on the field. You're writing more papers, you're going to get more papers. It's that kind of same thinking.
Great.
I love what you guys are saying. I just want to make one comment. I mean, I think it's all about persistence. You just have to keep at it, because there isn't any perfect paper. You could shoot holes in any paper. So, when it comes back and it's not accepted, or if you get a revision, it's asking for a revision, you're usually in good shape. You usually can push that through. But if it's rejected, there's so many other journals out there, and you guys mentioned them. JSES, recognized this, so they did, expand to the new family of journals. So now, just to make sure it's said on this call, seminars in arthroplasty is one for arthroplasty topics, reviews, reports, and techniques, so RRT, then JSES International is all the family of JSES. So, with all those journals available, the likelihood of publication is much higher. And just to comment on the, sort of the open access issue, some of these are hybrid journals, which means that you have the choice, once it's accepted, for it to go to all the subscribers for no cost, or alternatively, you can pay a charge, to have it open access to anybody in the world. So you do have the choice at the end. But anyway, all great points. Just be persistent. I mean, that's really
What are your thoughts, Ted, on the open access? Because I know when we were, all of us, when we were training, it was like, you have to have it in the peer-reviewed literature. So kind of, what about this open access thing? Good thing, bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I mean, it's the numbers of publications that I think are really important. Like if you're going in front of the academic, promotions committee, they're going to look at numbers of publications. You might get into some universities where, they're really critical, and they'll say, there's not a high impact factor there. But in the end, none of us have that high an impact factor. Relative to other specialties, we just are not, we're already kind of the low men on the totem pole. So I think it's really important just to get it published somewhere. I really don't think it matters if it's in open access or, I mean, there are some crappy open access journals out there, but if it's got, the JBJS or the JSES moniker on it, it's respected and credible.
And Lisa, to one of the other points, the idea of getting it denied, and sometimes some of the great reviewer comments can really improve a paper. I've had a number of papers where I won't name the names of the journals. I tried this journal, got really great comments, but denied. And then I applied with this journal, and I got in, like, quote unquote, the better journal with a higher impact factor, in part because the reviewers made a light bulb turn on in my head and say, you know what, they made a great point. I got to clean it up that way. And it improved the paper.
Yeah, no, that is very true. They sometimes really do have some great ideas. So we have 10 minutes left. I just want to encourage everybody who's participating to please put any questions into the chat. Dr. Gupta and Dr. Hassan are keeping an eye on that, and I've kind of been looking for questions. So don't be shy. There's no stupid questions. This is hard, and we want to be helpful and make sure that we address everything that you want to talk about tonight. So I just want to kind of go down the panel. So speaking directly to the fellows, Ted, any final pearls of advice that you would give at this point? We've talked about a lot, but anything else that you just want to get out there?
Yeah, I mean, so the persistence is important, trying to get things through to publication and finish the process. I mean, I think that's a key point. But, really just more general thoughts about the benefits of research. We didn't go into much detail on that, but there are a lot of benefits. I mean, for me, it's one of the most rewarding things that I do. I mean, it can take a lot of time and effort, but, I really, get excited when we find out something interesting and new that we can contribute. So, I think that's important. But there are other things. I mean, there are benefits. There are financial benefits. There's reputational benefits. There's a variety of different things that that research is important for. You know, if you're talking about industry relationships, you know, if you're working on consulting contracts, et cetera, with industry, they're looking for thought leaders, you know, so they want people that are out there speaking on the podium, presenting their research, et cetera. So, you know, if you're a successful research scientist or clinical researcher, people are going to knock on your door. So again, just to talk a little bit more about the benefits of research, I really think there are a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Right. Ron, final pearls of wisdom?
You know, I think that the committed few that are on the call are probably the ones that are probably going to do the research. And so maybe I'm singing to the choir, but just a little bit more about my story. I went to a closed hospital system that had no connections to anything remotely academic. And I was fortunate enough to be around a group of people to start a registry program. And through the 20 or 25 years that we've developed it, I've been able to get a lot of great research out and stimulate my own mind to the points, some of the points that Ted made that are so salient. And now we're opening a medical school, and I just hired on a half-time position at our own medical school. So I'm staying internal to our system. I don't have to move or anything. But because of that research that I poured the time in over the years, I'm probably going to get a better academic rank. And so it goes to show that research is good for the sake of helping patients. We also do systems research, to Ted's points, that people will kind of call on you and say, tell me about systems research. We need to reorganize how healthcare is going on in America. Some of that stuff sounds mundane, but when you're the person who draws up how that's going to go, it's really amazing. It's fulfilling. And down the line, it can make a part of your career that's later on be so much more fruitful and satisfying.
Great. Brandon?
I'd say two things. One is say yes to anything that comes your way when you start. You don't know if it's going to be good, bad. It might be a hit, might be a miss. I've done some projects that have been wildly successful and some that have taken a ton of my time and have gone absolutely nowhere. But I think it's worthwhile. It always teaches me something every time I do it. So I would just say, if you're presented with an opportunity, take it. The other thing I would say is be very organized, because you're going to start practice. Things are going to get hectic. You're going to try to make your post-operative protocols for things, and things are going to start to fall through the cracks with your research. So the way I do it is I have a Word document with every study that I'm working on, studies that I haven't started yet, studies that I've started, where they're at, what needs to be done with each of them, studies that were submitted, what journal they were submitted to, on what date, if they've been rejected from ones before, so I know I don't submit them to the same journal, studies that are in press, when they got accepted to be in press, and then the 4 studies I have that have died that I keep on there just to remind myself to not let studies die, to Ted's point of being persistent, because I couldn't get those through to publication. But I think it's important to really stay on top of it, because when you're a resident fellow, people are constantly asking you, because they're not your projects anymore, they're their projects, so they're staying on top of them. Now you're the attending, you have to be on top of your own research and know what has to be done at each step, because you'll see there's a reason that things drag on for years and don't get published. It's because nobody continues to put them through. So being organized will help you tremendously.
Yeah, that's great. The other thing that I want to mention is the one other thing that I did is I took a scientific writing course too. I know I took these 2 things. I took a grant writing course and I took a scientific writing course. The scientific writing course was through AAMC. So it was not just orthopedics. It was, you know, people from everywhere. And I have to say, and I wasn't a horrible writer, but I really learned a lot. There's a lot of literature out there on how to write. And so if you're going to do this, I would definitely, you know, invest some time and effort into really learning. Linda Sandell, Sandell, wrote an article on writing for the Journal of Orthopedic Research, which when I first started, I would put in front of me and reread before I started to write every article, because it was so coherent and succinct and really helpful, even for clinical papers. So, and that's in Journal of Orthopedic Research. So that's helpful as well.
Can I ask you, Lisa, some organizations kind of have a relationship between the research scientist and the clinical researcher, and people take parts. What do you feel about that? say, you're the clinician, Lisa, you do the intro and discussion. And of course, we'll all edit each other's work. And I'm the scientist, the statistician or scientist. I'm going to do the materials, methods, and results. How do you all feel about that? I think it's reasonable as long as everybody looks at each other's work. Do you have any feelings on that?
Yeah, I always I like to took the intro because I like to make sure that, especially if we're going to send it to a clinically oriented journal, that it is oriented to make people who practice clinical medicine think that your science is interesting. And then I also was really into the discussion, and especially for the basic science papers, one of the PhDs or the students always wrote that. So yeah, I think, staying in your wheelhouse and what you do best is, helpful.
I'm watching if Ted is bristling at that as an editor. No, I'm trying to take cues.
It's all good, man. It's all good. There's no perfect papers. I want to make one more point that we didn't talk about, and that's the intellectual property issue, because I think that's something that we've all seen and probably learned, and the fellows probably haven't yet. But if you discover something, don't put it out there, until if you think you have something important, talk to your technology transfer office or the attorneys in your system, or whoever you need to talk to protect that intellectual property, because the minute it's out in the open forum as an abstract, as a presentation, as a publication, you lost it. So it's just something important that you guys need to be aware of.
Yeah. So somebody asked me, the lead author or the senior author is Linda Sandell. I'm putting this back in the chat. Somebody asked me about that in Journal of Orthopedic Research. This is an older paper. So, I mean, I used it when I first started. That was 1999. So that's how old that is. Okay. I just dated myself, but oh well, now you all know how old I am. Anyway,
29.
and then Samer asked me about the importance of collecting intake data, digital platform or pen and paper. Honestly and practically, I want to get it however I can get it. But if you have the ability to do it digitally, it's amazing. So, if you can have, an iPad system where that can be uploaded automatically, that's amazing. But if you have a 70-year-old lady who comes in with her attendant, if that person can just get that out on paper too, that's, you can scan that in. So.
But our lives have changed since we went to our electronic medical record. I'm not trying to push any, but we have Epic in our system, and virtually everything's on that. If you can get a system that is taking everything in and it's even getting pushed into that, because a lot of our registry costs changed. We were having to pay for people to input sheets of paper in the old days. Now all this stuff is input. Our registries are initiated by the surgeon doing a form. Initially, that's the intake of the patient, because the implant registries. But so that's really changed our lives.
But pulling that data is a lot easier too, if you put it in like that. So actually getting the data back out is much easier. If you put it, I mean, I agree with you. However you can get it. But if you can put it in electronically and get it back out as a spreadsheet, it makes your life a lot easier.
Right. And then too, you have to make sure it's accurate, right? Because every time you enter something, there's errors. So you kind of have to scrub your data too. So in fact, on big NIH grants and prospective clinical trials, there are people who do nothing but scrub the data.
So thank you, everybody, for an amazing night. Your comments and insights are incredibly appreciated. I appreciate the time and efforts. And stay tuned for next week's session on the virtual fellow series. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe. Good night.
Thanks, guys.
Good night. Thank you.
Oh, appreciate it.